When Apple introduced the M2, its next-generation Apple Silicon chip in June 2022, expectations for the M2 MacBook Pro skyrocketed. Surprisingly, the M2 MacBook Pro's release has been met with many issues to consider before purchasing one, although it has yet to be on the market long enough for significant issues to develop. Today, we'll discuss M2 MacBook Pro problems, what Apple don't tell you. Since their release, the M2 Macs have been all the rage, with in-depth analysis of their new features appearing online and in print. Now that numerous critics have had a chance to try out the M2 computers, there are reports that they could be more flawless than Apple had initially advertised. While poor SSD performance issues, which we'll go into detail later in the video, are generally reported in the M2 MacBook Pro basic model, there are a few more problems you might encounter on the M2 MacBook Pro and Air variants. It is pretty aggravating when your brand new Apple notebook has a problem right out of the box, and we can relate to that. That's why we developed this list of potential issues to rethink before making a purchase.
You'll thank me later.
6. 720p web camera. First, we have a very pressing issue here. The M2 MacBook Pro has only a 720p web camera, so if you need your webcam to record larger images for longer periods, then you might want to look elsewhere, since a 1080p webcam is more suited to that role. It is quite disappointing, considering that a standard $1,990 laptop keeps its increasingly out-of-date 720p webcam from earlier versions. But that is just what you are getting on the M2 MacBook Pro, so you may not want to buy it just yet. 5. Battery life. Now, Apple marketed the M2 MacBook Pro's 67-watt fast charging capability, which can charge the battery from 0% to 50% in under 30 minutes. Apple throws in a 67-watt fast charging adapter at no extra cost with the purchase of the M2 MacBook Pro, even on a standard model. However, the M2 MacBook Pro's battery didn't really see any improvement. It is similar to the previous model. Still, it's an impressive one, but improvement would have been preferred. The MacBook M2 is a decent laptop despite the video's characterization of its flaws. If you're interested in seeing what it's capable of, subscribe to our channel and get access to our full review.
I don't think you'll regret it.
4. Slow SSD performance. Also, Apple's new M2 CPU was advertised as more powerful and faster than previous M1 chipsets. According to Apple, M2 provides nearly 90% of peak performance of the 12-core chip, while using just 1/4 of the power. While the M2 SoC may offer some speed improvements over the M1 chipset, its SSD performance is lacking in some cases. One common complaint about the M2 MacBook Pro and MacBook Air is sluggish SSD performance. The base model has a single NAND chip, a 256GB SSD, and an 8-core GPU. Since the M1 MacBook Air has two NAND chips with the same hardware specs, this setup has been roundly criticized, leading Apple to redesign the M2 MacBook Pro's entry-level configuration. Furthermore, benchmarks show that the M2 basic model of the MacBook was 50% slower in read-write performance compared to the M1 variant. After running a battery of tests on the M2 MacBook Pro's entry-level configuration, 8GB of RAM and 256GB of storage, we discovered that its SSD performance is inferior to that of the M1 MacBook Pro's entry-level configuration. An SSD's performance may not be a priority for casual users who want to surf the web, watch videos, and do light office work, but it could be a deal-breaker for those who need to multitask professionally. For example, if you go with the M2 MacBook Pro, it may be tasking when exporting high-resolution images or files, so you'll need lots of time.
Seems like a lot of work.
3. The design of the MacBook M2. The M2 MacBook Pro has the same design as their older models. For example, the M2 MacBook Pro has only 2 Thunderbolt ports on the older models, and its keyboard layout is also the same. Apple should have gone with a new design for a laptop costing as much as the M2 MacBook Pro. We think Apple's focus for the M2 MacBook Pro is largely on the M2 chips. Ignoring other features of the laptop is quite disappointing. There are general issues about the M2 that should attract concern, like its thermal throttling and performance, which has widely received reports on since its release. We'll talk about that soon, so stay tuned. 2. Sound quality. Now, users may have to decide for themselves when it comes to the M2 MacBook Pro's sound quality. According to our review, the speakers are noticeably better than those found in competing laptops, but they could have improved the sound system's quality in the M2 MacBook Pro. The M2 MacBook Pro sounds identical compared to the previous M1 version. If you're worried about the M2 MacBook Pro's audio quality, you can listen to it in-store before making a purchase decision. Additionally, Remember your AppleCare options and the period during which you can make a return. Give this video a thumbs up if you like this recommendation.
We're counting on your generosity.
1. Thermal throttling and performance. Moving on, CPU throttling is another frequently reported issue with the MacBook Pro M2. The M2 MacBook Pro's small and light design has catapulted it into the spotlight, but problems with overheating and CPU throttling have also received a lot of attention. Our review found that the CPU can become as hot as 108 degrees, which is considerably higher than the maximum temperature allowed for a laptop of this type. Even though the M2 MacBook Pros has a fan included in its design, tests revealed that they were underperforming compared to the MacBook Air, which has a fanless design. Still, the M2 MacBook Pro's standard performance is excellent, but if you want to get the most out of your laptop, you may want to upgrade. The 13-inch Apple MacBook Pro M2 2022 is equipped with the company's most recent M2 chip, providing exceptional performance and battery longevity. However, the laptop feels like it needs to be improved. The 14-inch MacBook and 16-inch MacBook Pro from the previous year provide superior displays, processing power, and expansion options for those who need a more robust laptop for their business. So far, Apple has upgraded the M2 chip on only the MacBook Pro and MacBook Air models. If you are interested in knowing how the M2 chips fare on the MacBook Air, watch our next feature, M2 MacBook Air, First Impressions and Long-Term Review. Thanks for watching.